Good afternoon. This is Pseudonymous. Instead of this rubbish course, you'll be treated to my course. This Professor Limnell.
No, this is my course. Oh! Good afternoon. Yes, this is our lecture hall, not pseudonymous who were trying to steal this open lecture series. Warm welcome this autumn's internet forum. There are some people here in the lecture room, like it used to be nowadays physically, but I just heard that there are so many people digitally attending, like it happens nowadays. So both here in the physical lecture hall as well as online, warm welcome to Internet Forum, and we are starting this open lecture series now. I have to say that when we started to plan this open lecture series about 6 months ago, I didn't know how topical the theme of this lecture series is. As you know, there are 3 big words in the title: technology, security, and future. And those are the topics that are very relevant if you are, for example, today reading newspaper or following media. And I am very happy that we will have during this autumn, I would say, best lectures that we were able to have. And my name is Jarno Limnell. I'm professor of practice in cybersecurity here in Aalto University, and I am responsible for this lecture series. So if you have any feedback, I'm the right address to call or send email. But without further introduction, I think we will go to the first lecture. The opening lecture will be given. Timo Harakka, as you know, is in Finland Minister of Transport and Communications. Well known, well respected professional in this field, and I have to say that on behalf of myself and Aalto University, Minister Harakka, warm welcome to Aalto University.
Thank you, Jarno. It almost feels like home.
If I may ask in the beginning, when was the last time that you gave a lecture in university?
Well, it's been a while, and that's why I feel a bit giddy, like a band that is supposed to present some new material that's not been too much rehearsed. But I'm looking forward to have a benign audience.
Excellent. Please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jarno. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honor and pleasure to speak to you on data capitalism in the world of crisis. This is obviously something I have had the privilege of observing and even participating in during the last 3 years as the Finnish Minister of Transport and Communications, largely responsible for digitalization and the data economy. Usual disclaimers apply. This is not an official view of the Finnish government. As a matter of fact, I'm writing a book with the same title, so I'm really excited to share my thoughts on data capitalism to you. And due to the framing of this lecture series, I'll speak more from a security perspective than from an economics point of view. Okay, great. So the structure of the next 30-ish minutes is very simple. I want to talk about external threats to the existing model of data economy, and then of the inherent problems attached to large data sets, data accumulation, AI, and algorithms. First, allow me to say a few words of the concept of data capitalism. As we all know, capitalism has proven to be a very successful model of Western societies. It may also be worth noting right in the beginning that yes, I'm speaking from the perspective of the affluent global north, and most of what I say has little or no relevance for the global south, and we'll come back to this issue later. So there are several forms of capitalisms, and often due to both societal and technological changes, at any given period of time, some form may be prevalent. You can argue that for the past 10 to 15 years, data capitalism has been the predominant form of economic, societal, cultural, and personal relations. Platforms rule our lives. So what's specific about data capitalism as compared to others? I cannot go very deep here, but at least for argument's sake, please accept the notion of data as capital. So what does that mean? Capital isn't just money. Capital is something that is accumulated and circulated endlessly. That's the essence of capital, this merry-go-round. And as soon as it stops, that's the end of capitalism. So what do Meta, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, and Alphabet Google have in common, these mama monsters? They accumulate data without even knowing why and what for, but because there is intrinsic value in data, and the value of infinite hoarding of data is already discounted in the expectation of even greater dominance of these most valuable companies on earth. And if you wonder why Meta is branching into VR, why Amazon is a bookstore and a cloud service, why Microsoft is big in gaming, Apple is running a Hollywood studio, and Google is toying with drones, these diversifications do not follow any old business logic, but the logic of finding new ways and avenues to utilize the data they are relentlessly gathering about us and our environment. Here are some numbers just to give the idea of the sheer size of data capitalism. First, let's appreciate that we consume about 100 zettabytes of data annually. That's a multiple of 21. Due to the accelerating speed and capacity of both processing power and connections, the range of data applications has grown from emails and internet pages to social media, audiovisual streaming, 3D gaming, augmented and virtual reality, IoT, blockchain, large dataset processing and learning algorithms, visual recognition, encryption, quantum computing, and all sorts of AI. So this is 1 minute of internet. It generates $1 million of revenue to Amazon, to Apple a little less, to Google $500,000, to Microsoft 300,000, and Meta 200,000. 1 minute, 60 minutes an hour, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And how many years? That is the question. Now let's turn to the politics of data capitalism. It's clear that following the era of financial deregulation, the spirit of data capitalism is very much of a libertarian, small state or no state philosophy. Crypto is a logical extension of that mindset. So there's a lot of literature how these mega corporations form powerful monopolies and oligopolies. They buy out the competition. Hundreds of startups have been swallowed by them. They collect excessive rents from applications that want to exist in their so-called ecosystem. I rather call it a monoculture. They hinder innovation. So what should governments do? What happens to corporations that are too big to govern? In the previous century, trust busting was the fate of Standard Oil and AT&T. Well, then something interesting happened. China became an even bigger threat, and this, I suspect, will save these big platforms. The Trump administration banished TikTok and Huawei, slapped import duties to Chinese technology, and reversed the course of globalization. The US companies became his allies, convincing the government that they are US weapons in the race for key technologies and strategic assets. Deep learning, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing, augmented reality, virtual reality, face recognition, any technology that has military or security dimension. So it is as Silicon Valley hippies just got conscripted. So the data giants became part of new geoeconomics, strategic interests. So when Russia brutally attacked Ukraine, the new data military complex was in place already. February 24th just put the final touches to the new world order, a more bipolar world, a deglobalizing world, an insecure and insular international regime. So what to expect? 2 months after the Russian attack, Christine Lagarde, the president of the European Central Bank, gave a speech in Washington. And she outlined 3 processes that we are witnessing after and during the twin crises of COVID-19 and war in Ukraine. These are trends in the overall economy. I will try to translate them in terms of data capitalism. Well, first, the supply chains will be more diverse, and the West will avoid dependency to Chinese industry and technology. In Europe, we realized all of a sudden that China provided 1%, many of the critical raw materials, and that the EU only provides 1% or less of some specific raw materials from lithium-ion batteries, wind turbines, and electric traction motors. This is why the EU produced the CHIPS Act, and the US is allocating $52 billion for setting up a domestic semiconductor industry. The critical reshoring is transforming value chains crossing the globe into value circles that go around your own house. In Europe, we have also woken up to reclaim our autonomy. Our Prime Minister, Sanna Marin, has pointed out the dangers of dependencies. During COVID, we were dependent on Chinese medical equipment. Now Europe is facing an energy dependency crisis. The rest of the world is suffering from food dependencies. And finally, we need to have technological autonomy. This should have consequences for network security, particularly in 5G vendor policy and 6G standards and protocols regime. The second observation: war begets a war economy. War economy is never a competitive market, it is a state procurement system. Suddenly, the state is back in business and back in charge, dictating the rules. First, there is this concept of strategic assets, which must be preserved. That category is expanding all the time. Second, there are either allies or untrusted partners. Business is just an extension of geopolitical blocks. There are defensive measures, such as investment screening, export controls, and even exclusion of enemy technology. There are offensive measures, such as subsidizing national champions and domestic industry. All this obviously flies in the face of the idea of a free enterprise and market economy. But corporations are adapting to their advantage. They play the game. They argue that much of what they do is critical for national security. And that is a new way to cut out the competition, particularly foreign competition. War economy is conducive to protectionism. That used to be a dirty word, but nowadays protection doesn't sound too bad. It's exactly what digital autonomy and technological autonomy mean for large European countries that have fallen behind in data capitalism. While there are serious privacy concerns, first exposed by the Snowden scandal, it's a whole different matter whether that calls for localizing all European data in Europe. Security is a very good concept if you want to tilt the playing field to your advantage. And thirdly, the globalization optimism is gone. Multilateralism is gone. As Finland and Sweden apply for NATO membership, we enter a more bipolar world, West versus the rest. It may be appropriate to note here that the global south things are different. Much of it remains unconnected in both literal and metaphorical sense. And it is remarkable how many African countries subscribe to the Putin narrative. Why shouldn't they? China has been competing with the West for the hearts of global South, and they are winning. Right. Now we are in an exciting junction. The brutal attack against Ukraine has made the world more bipolar, but there is a third alternative, a more optimistic vision, which I want to propose. Like financial capitalism, data capitalism comes in various versions. At the height of financial capitalism 20 years ago, Manuel Castells and Pekka Himanen identified three regional versions: the Asian, Anglo-American, and Nordic. Some of you might be familiar with my earlier writings on the subjects, that's why these three concepts are also in Finnish. Also, data capitalism could be set up on different principles according to main modalities of action: to control, to conquer, or to collaborate. Asian, American, European versions. So that's not just two camps, but three. And that would entail a tripolar world, tripolar world. So we have to accept the realities of the current situation. The monopolistic tendencies of data capitalism have been augmented by security concerns and military needs. In order to preserve democracy and human rights in this war economy, we need to have an international rulebook, enforceable regulations. And that is exactly what we in the EU have been busy with lately. So there's a tsunami of legislation right there. Very briefly, they will regulate how big platforms operate, how to ensure innovation and competition, how to protect customers' rights and user data, portability of data, interoperability of data, and limits to the malign use of AI. In the current situation, this regulation cannot be agreed in multilateral forums, so EU is going it alone, trusting, as with GDPR, that access to a market of 450 million relatively affluent customers will force US and China to comply. So this is what Professor Anna Bradford, a Finnish political science in Columbia Law School, called the Brussels effect. She coined this concept already 10 years ago, so she was very impressive. With the Brussels effect, data capitalism will be a tripolar power struggle globally. So let's bring out the popcorn. Now, dear friends, we go to the second part. In the first part, I outlined the security environment and strategic interests affecting the data economy. Now I'd like to discuss some inherent security issues that have emerged, particularly during the brutal attacks of Russia to Ukraine. We need to talk about potentially fatal consequences of unchecked algorithms. So first of all, let me ask you a question. How many of you are familiar with DALL-E? Please raise your hand. DALL-E. D-A-L-L/E. Right. DALL-E, that's a wordplay, mixing Salvador Dali and the Pixar movie WALL-E. And it's an image generator, visualizing a part of a massive data set called GPT with more than 100 billion parameters, huge corpus of natural language process. So the GPT model can produce pretty amazing written texts, including modern poetry, speeches, and as you can hear, lectures. So you can go to the site of OpenAI and make DALL-E visualize any silly thing you want. Pandas playing basketball, teddy bears computing underwater. And for some reason, the stable example is what you see, a baby radish walking a dog in a tutu. Go figure. But when you ask DALL-E to present a CEO, executive of a company, so this is what it comes up with. The AI is just as good as the datasets. If and when there is bias in the corpus and stereotypes in the society, the algorithm will multiply it, strengthen it, make it even more predominant. So this is something, give credit to OpenAI, that they have recognized and acknowledged. So they fed in parameters that took into account gender and ethnicity. So DAL-E 2 will show you the mitigated results. Much better, much more diverse. And let's have a look at the original query on the picture of a teacher. Pretty much a stereotype of Mrs. So-and-so. And now the mitigation. Wow, a male teacher and a male African-American teacher as well. One more example, a portrait of a woman, mainly white, now mitigated, more diversity. But do you notice something? Something that had not been taken into account in the mitigating parameters. They are all young. Old women do not exist, as they do not exist in the society, they do not exist in the data, they do not exist in the imagination of the masters controlling the artificial intelligence. This is not funny. This is dangerous. Now, let's have a look about platforms and Ukraine. Social media has been the breeding ground of vitriol, disinformation, fake news, and propaganda. This is particularly dangerous after February 24th, but it's not like the platforms could not have done more even years ago. They had all the time to prepare, but not the will. You're perhaps familiar with all this, but let me recap. Facebook poisoned the 2016 presidential elections in the US and was forced to admit that more than 100 million users had been exposed to Russian fake news. Cambridge Analytica stole and sold personal information of 80 million Facebook customers to political purposes. Also, COVID-19 misinformation and disinformation was spread very efficiently through Meta. Vice President Nick Clegg, once Deputy Prime Minister of the UK, swore that Meta would not approve ads that would urge users to drink bleach, something that President Trump thought as a good remedy, or any ad that would downplay the pandemic. Well, a respected magazine called Consumer Report took Mr. Clegg to the task. And yes, Facebook did approve another ad which endorsed downplaying coronavirus, which is a hoax, and also the one that endorsed drinking of bleach, albeit in moderation. So maybe that was okay. Twitter is a playground of tens of millions of bots that the platform itself has acknowledged. The real number could be hundreds of millions. Recently, the former security chief of the company sent a whistleblowing memo to regulators accusing the company of serious security breaches and even conspiring with foreign governments. That's Twitter. But then there are killer algorithms, literally. In all platforms, but particularly on YouTube, the recommendation algorithms direct users to most provocative and thus clickbait content. In other words, toward aggression and violence, outright and other extremist stuff. Well, that is dangerous in itself, but now the recommendations are working for Putin. Well, just after the attack at February 24th, if you queried war in Ukraine in YouTube, so this is what you got. The number one link would be, why is Ukraine the West's fault? Mere 27 million people have been thus educated by now. Well, the platforms say that they have been downranking this kind of content, they fixed their recommenders, but they have made all sorts of promises before. As a decision maker, I would rather ensure that this is done instead of just trusting these companies that have a history, if not a business logic, of monetizing aggression. And the artificial intelligence they are using is not able to curb disinformation, fake news, and propaganda. It is equally not able to separate real war atrocities from otherwise violent content. So, in early April, Facebook censored all pictures of the massacre of Bucha so that the world would not know. So the platform denied the world the truth. These pictures and the outrage that is the only human reaction to these crimes against humanity, we were denied. So folks, should we regulate algorithms? I think this is the most pertinent security issue. The problem, unfortunately, is that the platforms do not even themselves know the term. Tens of thousands of algorithms and hundreds of thousands of so-called data pipelines they use, as per a testimony of a Meta internal memo. The Chinese government wants to control the algorithms, so it has ordered the leading Chinese tech companies publish descriptions of their algorithms and has banned anything that will encourage addiction and excessive spending. Fantastic. We could use that kind of legislation. The aforementioned Digital Services Act, one of the big 5 landmark laws of EU, does require some algorithm transparency of the very largest online platforms. So it remains to be seen whether that will ever be enforced. To cap all this, we've let technology take over and now struggle to even understand what is happening. Hope we can find our way back and then move on responsibly. Finally, dear friends, I don't want to end with such a bleak note. So I remain optimistic that complementing the Brussels effect, we have been able to contribute some Helsinki effect to the security of data capitalism, to make it more human-centric, to enhance collaboration, empower citizens, and most importantly, enhance trust. There is no data economy without trust, because without trust, there's no reason why anyone should share data. The most critical raw material is trust. So in Finland, we started the My Data movement already back in 2016. Actually, with the new EU legislation, we finally have some institutions in place that can help My Data, help a citizen or community to govern their data, own it, and make the most of it for one's own benefit and not only the giant data corporations. Data activism could be an answer to many of the concerns I laid out tonight, including auditing and testing of algorithms, if only the APIs, application programming interfaces, were open. More generally, we need to have universal access to data. We need to ensure that data is shared, non-proprietary, and interoperable. These are principles that were promoted during the Finnish presidency of the European Union in 2019. I'm happy to see them instilled in the recent and coming EU legislation. So if our concerns are these, the lack of privacy of citizens, the privatization of our common data, and the piracy or hijacking of our own destinies by rampant and irresponsible use of technology, we might answer that we need the input of all stakeholders, we need to share the data and the benefits that ensue, and we need to scrutinize technology to ensure that it will benefit our societies and reflect our values. And if you excuse one more wordplay, I'm cautiously optimistic we can provide a more secure, more accessible, and more egalitarian data capitalism. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Minister Timo Harakka, for excellent opening lecture this autumn's Internet Forum. I have several questions. I will start with one if you let me. Being in the key political decision maker in Finland in this very interesting field, how you see what is your biggest challenge from the politics point of view when you are thinking these huge things that you were mentioning in your lecture?
Well, thank you for the question. The interesting thing about data economy or data capitalism is that it is so under-politicized. Now, if you are a decision maker or a politician and you stand in a market square and people come and they want to talk about stuff, no one ever asks you anything about digitalization or data issues. And we all know that these are huge issues that really make or break our future. And they are huge economic interests, they are huge societal interests, and these are so under-discussed and under-politicized. So I guess this is what I'm trying to do here, is to politicize this issue.
Very good. So next time when you meet somewhere a political decision maker or Minister Timo Harakka, please ask something about the digitalization of technology. Questions, comments? I think this is excellent opportunity to ask at the moment. Okay, I will ask next question by myself.
Gather your courage, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, one part of this huge future security data technology, what we are concentrating in this lecture series, is some visions. What is the future of the internet? Do you have any ideas with your colleagues internationally? What you are discussing? What will be the future internet look like?
Well, that's a tough question, but following the logic that we've had with technological advances, so the processing power, the increase of both processing power and calculations, and also in connectivity, so we can see much more advanced applications.
Yeah.
So there will be a wow effect. The metaverse, I'm quite sure that will be really immersive 3D experience. And there, I don't know much about the metaverse except one thing. If my kids that are 9 and 12 are already glued to their handsets, so they will be absolutely lost in the metaverse. That will be so addictive, and we should start thinking about the societal repercussions already now. So this is something that I'm interested in exploring further. Other area that I know very little of is crypto tokenism, all this area of future experimentation, of which I would like to have much more insights.
Yeah. So interesting times in that sense as well. Please.
My name is Nassim Master. So my question is basically that it's very good. I have studied GDPR in my country. I'm from Pakistan, basically. So there's not a huge awareness of data privacy and how we should move forward with that data. So what do you think in terms of future? Like, it's good if there are data privacy laws in the EU, but these capitalist corporations, like the mega corporations, they're not only making their money off in these developed countries. There's also a huge market in these developing countries, like Facebook and WhatsApp has the largest number of users in India, and similarly in the stock market in India. So are there any plans for politicians in the European Union and these developed nations, say, to have a union of nations from across the globe pushing for data privacy laws and advocacy for all the citizens of every state. Hopefully, my question is clear.
An excellent question and very multifaceted. Let me start with privacy first. I didn't deal much with these privacy scandals of espionage and all that came out with starting with Snowden, NSA and Pegasus. This is something that needs to be taken into account when we talk about the future of internet and connectivity. But sometimes I feel that the whole focus on privacy as per GDPR is sometimes kind of overwhelming other societal issues. Now we are all aware that the biggest market for internet connectivity will be South Asia. India and Pakistan, for instance, have tens and hundreds of millions of people who are unconnected right now. So they will be a very lucrative and interesting market for all these corporations. And what I'd really like to see is that this data economy would concentrate on the societal goods and community needs and all these positive elements, empowerment of communities, that would be in the focus. Because I think this is something that is very close to the Finnish hearts as well. As a Nordic country, as per my data activism, which I mentioned, this is something that needs to be enhanced. The societal power, the community power of data. And that's hugely important, I think. And as to whether there would be a multilateral international understanding of globally beneficial use of data and the rules of that, I'm skeptical because of this increasing deglobalization, this regionalization trends. It seems to me, I hope I'm wrong, but it seems to me that the world is really dividing more strongly to geo-economic blocks. So that's why I think it's been right for the European Union to go it alone and to kind of be assured that US and China will comply as they've done with GDPR. That has also made a very multi-stakeholder negotiations feasible. Otherwise, it would have taken ages, as we've seen with the international tax regime with the OECD in the past years. It just takes ages and is not implemented. Now, what we see in EU, although people are prone to say it takes ages and it's a very prolonged negotiation, but on the other hand, it's taken a few years. It's been democratic and it's been agreed upon, negotiated. I'm very happy to be part of that process, and it will be implemented. So I hope that will be a beacon of light in this dark age.
There is one question from online asking that yes, this topic is huge. If there will be legislation or regulation in place, do the decision makers know and understand what they are aiming for? The content might be challenging. How you answer to this?
Well, yeah, if I didn't know what I was doing, I wouldn't know it myself, would I? But no, that's quite true, and this has to do with what I said about politicizing the issue, educating the electorate with these issues. and also decision makers with these issues, because they have huge implications of each and everyone's life. And that's why we've taken up the challenge in the European Union. And there is, it's not unanimous. There are conflicts of interest. Business has not always, business interests have not always been very conducive to what we've been doing. But in that sense, the Russian attack on February 24th did smooth things out. We didn't want to quarrel about the necessity of data regulation. We saw the necessity. I hope I demonstrated the challenges of disinformation, propaganda, and fake news being part of the equation. We do not want to have the social media and the platforms be the fifth column in this war. We want it to be on our side. So there is a kind of a unity. So for the first time, I was in a meeting where there was Google, YouTube, Meta, and Twitter at the same time, and for the first time they all agreed that there is need for the regulation. So I'm fairly optimistic that this could be a step forward.
Thank you very much. And if you allow, last question.
Sure.
We have many students here in the lecture hall and especially online, and they are studying many things related to technology, digitalization. What would be Minister's main message to all the universities' students in this field? What they should learn and concentrate on?
I was very impressed by the results of a poll that was taken from students that were leaving the economics faculty of Aalto University after graduation, compared to what happened previously. In 10 years ago, when the graduates were asked what was their aspiration in life, it's mainly to be an entrepreneur and be rich. And the answer, I think it's 1 or 2 years ago, was that they want to change the world for the better. And I think this is remarkable. I think you all contribute very much to our how we survive these crises and overcome these global crises, including global warming, and also unequal relations in the world that are accelerated by the unequal relations in the data economy and data capitalism. I think you all are doing a hugely important work and will contribute to the betterment of the world, and we certainly do appreciate and applaud it.
Thank you very much, Minister Timo Harakka, and having the time and effort to come to Aalto University. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
And as you know, in each lecture evening or lecture day, we have 2 lectures at the same time. We will continue immediately, and I am very happy to have Stefan Lindström, who is our ambassador here in Finland, concentrating on digitalization and new technologies. And Stefan is here physically in the lecture hall at the moment. And please, Stefan,
Thank you,
come here. And I have to ask you, because I think many of people don't know how long Finland have had this kind of ambassador concentrating on digitalization and new technologies.
1 year and 13 days. I'm the first one. So I was appointed exactly 1 year, from September 1st last year. So that's what I've been doing. And I will show you a little bit about what I do and what it means in practice, in a sense. So that's what it is. My background is, of course, I lived in Asia for 8 years. I lived in California for 9 years. So these issues are something that are very close to my heart. And in that context, I also have a couple disclaimers.
Excellent. Hey, before I let you start your lecture, one question I have to ask. At the moment, security, future, technology, what is the hottest topic in the world?
Depending on who you ask, of course.
I ask you.
Maybe the metaverse. But the problem is that many people don't understand what the metaverse is. I'll try to give you a picture about that as well. But let's see where we go. Security, of course, is the other one that is the underlying feature for everything, in a sense of that what you do has to be safe and secure.
Yes.
So in that sense, the topic of this lecture series has been really well worked out.
Very nice to have you. Please, floor is yours.
Thank you, Jan. I said I have two disclaimers. Pity that the minister left because one of them is relating to him. We have not coordinating our lectures with each other. I've never seen his lecture before. He has never seen mine, but there's going to be a lot of things. Actually, one slide is the same, which is kind of funny. Anyway, the other disclaimer, of course, I'm standing here as a private person, not as a representative of the Foreign Service, and the views expressed in this series, in this lecture, is their mine. But I'm here to talk to you about technology and geopolitics. I mean, in general, technology is the thing, should we put it this way, that affects the daily life of all the people most in the world, everywhere in the world. Regardless if you are from Pakistan, Uruguay, China or Finland, technology is the driver that affects your life the most. But this is the other part that the minister touched on as well. Technology has changed societies and the lives of humans all the time. And I go first back to the evolution picture on big factories and lines in a sense. This is the romantic picture in a sense of how it looked like in the factories. But when you look at the realities, it also changed societies drastically. The living conditions of people was not really that good. We came into the second industrial revolution where you already created things like sewage, electricity and steel, and then it also changed a lot of things in the society. This is of course the picture, what was called an Fordism in a sense that pictures the sort of second industrial revolution, and the societies changed. We got city planning, livelihood changed in a different way. Then came the chip. A lot of things happened. We came into the third industrial revolution, and by that IT in general, we got internet, we got mobile phones, mass communication. There's a reason why it says 2007 there. I come back to that one in a second. And then we came into the fourth industrial revolution, where we are living today, partly. We talk about cloud, we talk about big data, we talk about IoT, CPS, and so forth, right? And as the minister mentioned as well, many people don't even know what they are and how they work. Will they change also the societies and how we live? Maybe we are seeing this kind of thing with distant working that we realized in sort of practical terms during the COVID time. But in practical terms, we are living now somewhere between society 4.0 and 5.0. I mean, from the sort of information society to the super smart society, particularly here in Finland, but in most of the Western worlds. And this is not an easy transition, and it brings a lot of things. The bottom line is, though, that everything that can be digitalized will be digitalized. And it's not a question if you want it or not, it will be. It's very clear, and what it means for you, for companies, for societies, for governments, it means that you have to rethink, reimagine, reinvent, or otherwise you are going to be disrupted. Disruption is a really wonderful word in many ways because it entails a certain kind of positivism, at the same time a certain value, a change, as I see it, towards the better. But it creates challenges as well in many times. This picture behind me now is a really funny part in a sense because it shows the put on the London Underground map all kind of different issues. You have work, you have economy, you have finance, you have water, you have electricity, technology, digitalization. I can talk an hour just from this map. In a sense, and you look at the nodes where all these things interact. But the main thing is what we have to understand is that everything what we do has a connection to something else. And everything is going to be digitalized sooner or later. And what is digitalization? It's all about data. As mentioned before, big data. But now comes a big issue as well. you maybe have heard this story that data is the new oil, right? Anyone heard that one? For sure. I beg to disagree. I say that data is the new plutonium. And why plutonium? If you have plutonium and you use it for the good of the society, you have a power plant and it creates electricity. If it's utilized for something bad, it's a nuclear weapon. Or if you use it, it pollutes the globe for the next 40,000 years. Data is exactly similar. When you look at it, it can be used by Timo as well. It can be used also for something very, very bad. I'm going to explain in a second. But what is data? Data is funny in a sense because when we came here, it was just a collection of data from everywhere. I mean, they know where we came from, what mass transportation we used, who did we talk to, who did we sit next to, and so forth. Everything is just a collection of data. And it was the smartphone that changed everything. That's why I used the 2007 as a threshold. And when you think about it, what did the smartphone actually do? It has replaced all these things that you see up there. I mean, when was the last time you used a map, a paper map last time, or ever, which is kind of interesting in a sense. When did you use a physical alarm clock instead of a mobile phone? There's so many things, cameras, you name it. And it's continuous and continues in a sense of all these replacement services. Now we come to the same graph as Timo had as well, the internet minute. But what this actually means, it's just a collection of data. A massive collection of data, all the time, 24/7, 365. Then it's a question of how it's being utilized. And here we see also in a sense, first you acquire the data. Marshalling, I call it massaging the data in a sense so that it can be used. Then analyze it. Previously we amassed all this data, but we couldn't analyze it because it was impossible for a human being. But that's when we developed artificial intelligence. Then we came into a situation that it actually could be used. And now, of course, also action. Action means that you get those ads that you maybe don't want or that you did want. Or that you are followed and all your behavioral structures are being monitored and so forth. But another interesting observation from this graph is also that if you look at the companies there, you might recognize some of them, but you don't recognize most of them. But they're all billion-dollar companies lurking in the background in a sense, just working on your data, something to keep in mind. Then we come to another interesting part in a sense of the whole thing is that when you look at did the smartphone create winners? Of course they did. In the graph on the left-hand side, what you can see there is the market cap of the biggest companies in 2006. And as you see, Microsoft was the only data company that was up there. Otherwise, it was electricity and banking, energy and banking. If you go to 2016, it's the big companies have come up there, and ExxonMobil, the only energy company, has basically been moving horizontally on that. Let's put this one in a graph. This was the situation 2016. The same graph as I had up a couple of seconds ago. Take 2 years further, and how much had the market cap increased with these companies? Some of them 50, 60, 80% in 2 years. That's quite a growth, right? Let's take 2 more years, 2020. Where are we? Some of the companies have increased by 400%. And this is also, this graph has a political connotation in a sense because if you remember that Donald Trump told the American public that I have saved the economy and I have made you rich and blah, blah, blah. If you take away these 5 companies and 3 other ones, Tesla, Netflix and Salesforce, the American stock market went actually horizontal. But if you look at the impacts of these companies, it's so gigantic that it took the whole American economy with it. Okay, let's take 2 more years. January 2022, where are we? These are the market caps of the companies now. And to put this in context, so the market cap of Microsoft and Apple, January 2022, was bigger than the whole entire stock market of UK and Germany. I'll let that sink in a little bit. One company was bigger than the whole German stock market valued together, or the British. One company. That shows the value of data, if anything. Another thing is also when you look at it sort of in a sense, you go back 35 years, 40 years and see what's the difference between intangible assets and tangible assets. And in the old days, of course, it was good to own a factory and forests and God knows what. Today, the value comes all from intangible assets, from data, from talent, customers, IP, and so forth. So the change has been absolutely radical in this. But then, now I talked about all kind of old stuff and something you already maybe knew before, but now I'm heading a little bit into technology and geopolitics. Why is it so important to see who has control over the data and how do they work with that data? And does it actually affect my daily life in any sense? What are the tools? What are the drivers? Who are the players? Let's dig into this a little bit. First, a few words on the mega trends. We have to look at the drivers in a sense that what can change. I already talked about the disruption scene in a sense. What do the consumers want? A lot, of course, is consumer-driven, but also some is industry-driven. I'll come back to that in a second. But keep in mind, an open mind about the mega trends and try to identify them, and then you understand the bigger picture much better in many ways. There are many underlying topics here. I'm going to concentrate more on the number 5 and 6, the innovation technology parts, and then also how it affects them, politics and governance. But something to keep in mind, the mega trends. The first mega trend, as I see right now, basically also on Jarno's question there in a sort of what's happening on the Web 3.0. We now have a situation where the consumers actually generate the data, the content of the web in a totally different way than ever before. And it's growing rapidly. I mean, it's just crazy as you saw on what's happening on the 1 minute on the internet side. The issue is also, of course, that previously we had something centralized or decentralized with nodes. Now everything is just distributed, online everywhere all the time and accessible from everywhere. Another funny chart in this is also, in a sense, when you look at the Web 1.0 companies, some of them actually have went belly up, or the Web 2.0 companies. So the common factor with them is, of course, that they all deal with data. If you look at the Web 3 companies, sometimes when I give a lecture of this kind, I ask the audience to identify the companies. And so far, none have been able to identify even half of them. I don't know if I would be able to do it myself either, but these are the companies that are going to be the Googles, the Apples, the Microsofts of the future. Maybe not, but they're the ones who are the most promising one right now. Then we come, of course, to the metaverse. What's happening in the metaverse and is it going to be hot? Many times also I see that the journalists are being bombarded by different kind of activities and information from the hardware companies because they want to create something new. The issue here is also then that can we actually do it? I mean, if you look at the layers of the metaverse in a sense, we only think about the experience, but there has to be a hardware behind it that produces it. And here's a thing that I put forward many times is that how much business is actually done in the metaverse right now? Does anyone know any business that works in the metaverse right now? No. And I had a meeting in June with Chris Wolf. Chris is famous for the fact that he created MySpace. He sold it for 1.4 billion to Microsoft. Then he traveled around the world for 3 years, and then he founded a company called Jam City. Jam City makes games, many interactive games, particularly for children. 700 people, 700 million turnover. He's doing all right. I asked Chris, so what are you doing about the metaverse? And he said that, listen, Stefan, the 1% of our players are even able to use the metaverse because of the requirements of computational power and anything else. And maybe of those 1% is willing to do it. So we are watching the metaverse very closely. We are not investing a penny in it. We know it's going to be big, but we are watching it. What springs to my mind from here is that does anyone, have any one of you heard about a company called Boo.com? Boo.com was a Swedish company that came up in '99. They burnt about 600 million in a year. And they built up something that was the Amazon business model before Amazon, or Amazon and Zalando combined. The only problem was that there was no easy payment system, there was no smartphone, and there was no logistics. So of course it collapsed. But they were 10 years ahead of their time. A typical example of the metaverse also. Companies that are going in there, investing a lot, but if the people can't use it even for technological reasons, it's going to be very difficult. But like Timo said before also, my kids are 13 and 16, and the screen time they are using now, I'm really afraid of what's going to happen in the future, whether they're going to see any people at all. I mean, unless they are online and see them digitally. But this whole thing changes, trade patterns and the value chains, and what Timo also mentioned, what the sort of the rise of the new unilateralism in many ways. And we come into the sort of what I call globalization. The time of globalization when everything rapidly just expanded all over the world is gone. We now come back to what we call economic resilience, and the commerce making in the world is changing rapidly. One thing is, of course, semiconductors. Who controls the semiconductor world controls the world. The US is putting enormous amounts of money in there, as is the EU. And here is the Asian market right now. And Taiwan, a very small country actually, is controlling the semiconductor manufacturing in Asia totally. Another interesting aspect is the undersea internet cables. Keep an eye on those, because those who control the cables control the world. Interesting fact there. 5G, same thing again. And 5G is also, of course, a topic about how to collect data all the time. And I put in the words use of soft power there because China is today really amassing a lot of pressure on countries to buy Chinese technology. And what they do many times is that I have an example from Tunisia that my colleague sent me just a couple of days ago, where the Chinese send 100 students to China to study for free. The students can be picked by the telecom company if they buy the Huawei 5G network. So this kind of work is being done all over the world right now. Another thing is, of course, data storage and where it is located and how it's used. But in total, the use of data is now, we're bringing it back to something what I call the return of the great game. I mean, that was when the superpowers were sitting at one table and dividing the world in between them. A little bit the same thing is going on right now. And this is particularly concerning technology. I'm going to dig in these countries a little bit more deeper in a sense of what's happening. But what I see right now is something what I call the splinternet. A division of the internet in three distinct areas. What we have here is sort of the US model where all data is freely utilized. You can use it, monetize, and the consumers don't have any rights. In EU, we use it, we monetize it, but consumer protection is in the key value driving it all. And China, the government owns all data, and you are just a tool for the government to be controlled. All these issues are there in a sense that you have issues in the US, in Russia, in China, and exactly the same services, but they are siloed. And the key here is also that there are firewalls between them. We don't have any firewalls. Anyone can use our services. They are open. We have nothing to hide. But the Russians, the Chinese, they want to hide the world from their own citizens so that they can be controlled. And this is, of course, a bit problematic seen from our value perspective. But here we have also the thing then that regionalism is now replacing globalism in many issues. But here is, again, sort of the basic context in a sense that the EU wants to protect the people, the Americans want to empower them, and the Chinese want to control them, right? But what about the rest? What about Africa? What about large parts of Asia? What about Latin America? And this is the big issue right now in a sense that how do we sell them our values, our way of working, our technology, so that they are on our side, so to say, in a sense. This is not an easy task. It is really a couple of blocks. You have the totalitarian state on one side, and then you have the Western world on the other side. We are working now in something called T14, which is a coalition of technologically advanced democratic countries. FOC is Freedom Online Coalition, which is a human rights organization that is based on how data is being used in the world. And I think these initiatives are going to grow very, very big in the near future. But what we see is really a digital iron curtain in many ways. Of course, China and the US are the biggest fighters, so to say, in this. But what we see is a digital Cold War. It's a technology war. It's a production war. It's a trade war, as we have seen in many ways. It's a stock market war. As you know, the Americans kicked out all the Chinese companies from NASDAQ. And maybe we see a war. We saw the war now going on in Ukraine. Hopefully we are not seeing it anywhere else. We also have to look inside the countries, in a sense, what's going on there. And first of all, we have the US, in a sense. What are the values in the US? How do they work and how do they operate? And the US is the only superpower. There's no question about it. But what's happening inside the US is kind of interesting to see. And I lived there now in total for 9 years, and it's sometimes really scary. There is also the different context in a sense that we don't always know the values behind being a Republican or being a Democrat, and why do they vote the way they do, and what does it actually mean. There is a kind of a isolation ideology there in a sense that they only study their own stuff. It's kind of interesting to see how much my kids know about the American Revolution, but nothing about European history, having gone in American schools for a long time. Also, we have to think about the transatlantic relations, sort of what is the commitment of the US to Europe? And this is a big question, really, really big question, and it's really tied into technology, security as well. And then we have a kind of a selective multilateralism from the US, is that during the Trump era, I would say they left violently most of the international organizations, like ITU, the WIPO, UNESCO, and so forth. And it left a really, really big mark. You can't just participate in one thing and disregard everything else. Because what happened in ITU, when the US left and said that we are not paying anything and we don't think you are worth anything, they got a Chinese director general. And the Americans start complaining, this is not fair. Well, life is not fair, but you have to participate to be able to have any kind of influence. And then, of course, the relationship with China. They are really tied in together economically, but now the decoupling activities are going on very rapidly. But the question is really sort of that, what is the American dream? Is the original American dream still there? And is the American identity still there in many ways? I'll come back to the American identity as well in a couple of words a little bit later on. But the society in the US right now is very, very divided. And it's very difficult to get all these things back together again. But the work is in progress. And as always, the US have always come back. What is then the future of China? They have time in many ways, because Mao said in 1949 that China is going to be the most influential country in the world in 100 years. So they still have 25 years to go. And let's see where we are heading. They are defending the areas very close to China vigilantly. I mean, if you look at the South China Sea and things like this, they take it very, very seriously. They're also working globally through the Belt and Road Initiative, in a sense. They're very active in Africa, very active in Asia and different places, very active in Europe, Latin America. A lot of things are going on there. The Belt and Road I mentioned, the minerals was mentioned by Timo as well. And the funny part from the Finnish perspective is that the Chinese just declared that they're also a near-Arctic nation. But it just meant with this kind of a thing that now they also target their activities to the Arctic and see what's coming on from there. And they are working, like I said, with ITU, WIPO, and the other organizations. They are trying to change the sort of international order from the inside. Also in a way because they are bribing many African states that they vote for the Chinese and so forth. Very sneaky, but well, in diplomacy everything is evidently allowed. This is another interesting graph in a sense of showing the amount of computer science bachelor degrees in China and the US. And this is a little bit worrisome, also from a European perspective, because we are on the same line with the US here. The thing here, however, is that they only study in China and they study in Chinese, which means that they don't get the input from the rest of the world. And that doesn't mean that they are going to be successful in the long run. The same thing happened with Japan in the 70s and 80s. Anyway, where is China going? I see some problems lurking. and the big one is the demographics of China. They had the one-child policy for 40 years, and China today is about 1.4 billion people. In 20 years, they're going to be 1.2. In 30 years, maybe a billion. So they're going to lose 400 million people. This has another interesting political aspect as well, because when you think about the fact that they have only one child, and if China are going to war, are the elderly generation actually allowing the Chinese government to send their only child, many times the only son, to war? I don't think so. And this is really, really big. It's big in Russia already. So let's see where we are heading there. Economic development is a little bit sketchy. The debt amassing in China right now is scary, really scary. And this has also caused them to turn more inward politically in many ways. And the situation of Xi, I don't know how strong he is right now, and it's really open. The other thing what I said also in a sense that totalitarianism doesn't feed innovation. You can steal so much, but still you can't innovate on the basis of that. So it's not always the fact that they are going to win by stealing. They also have to innovate, and they are lacking behind. An interesting fact about the semiconductors that I mentioned before is that the difference between quality semiconductors is bigger now than it was 10 years ago between the Western world and China. So they can produce really low capacity ones, but they still cannot be the bigger ones. And because our capacity is increasing all the time, we are still making the gap bigger. Corruption in China is, of course, of a magnitude that we cannot comprehend, always a problem. And another issue also that was really interesting that I see in my work is that the Chinese got really scared about the European and the American sanctions after the Russia's attack against Ukraine. They didn't think that this would be possible. And in just a couple of weeks, we had put enormous sanctions on Russia. This scared the Chinese. What if we do something like that? What will happen to us? Can they actually get their act together? We thought these people were sort of, they will never get any decisions made. So big things there. And also the impact of COVID on China. I mean, they still put down cities, 1 million inhabitant cities for weeks and months. And the rest of the world is open. And this has left a kind of mentality to the China. Anyway, I turn to the third block. When elephants dance, the grass is suffering. Old proverb. Who am I talking about? Europe. What is the future of Europe? Can we regulate ourselves to power? Do we have an innovation policy at all? I'm highly skeptical in a way. How can we come into this game again, being the greats that we once were? And is it really the dark there in the behind, or what is the future of Europe? Interesting fact here is also when you look at the universities, the 50 best universities in the world, 7 of them are in Europe. None of them in the European Union. Do we have a problem? Yes, we do. We really do. Because we don't have an internal market that works. When the politicians keep on saying that all the bad things come from the EU and all the good things, this is what I bring to you, that doesn't create a kind of a sort of a working method that is beneficial for the whole of Europe. And talking about regulation, of course, then what is going on? Timo mentioned many of these, GDPR, DMA, and DSA, and so forth. In the US, they have now 5 legislative proposals, but I claim really that the US is outsourcing all its regulation to the European Union. They don't have the stamina, they don't dare to regulate the American big tech companies. And it's so much easier than to go behind the Europeans' back and say that, oh, they are doing it and now we have to apply it. And yeah, by the way, we also apply it in the US because we have to. It's kind of interesting. And it's also an interesting approach there, because when I was in the US now for 5 years, I spoke in different panels quite a bit. And many times I was attacked by the audience when I mentioned GDPR. How dare you? It has brought nothing good to this world. It only costs 7 billion for the companies to pay. And what are you Europeans doing? After the panel, the same guy came and talked to me and said that, I had to say that because of my company policy, but thank God somebody is doing something. So they recognize the things what are going on there. They recognize the need for regulation, But because of the political system, because of the lobbies, and because of all this, the Americans will never be able to regulate these tech companies, is my prediction. The funny part is that actually all regulation in the US on tech is based on a legislation from 1996. When you just think about how much technology has evolved after 96, it creates a pretty good picture of where we are heading. This picture is there because if my thinking is that if Trump would have got the second term, Europe might actually have would have been turning more to China as a cooperation partner. This is how bad it was. But it also makes you think about values and things like that. If we actually were on the brink of doing things like this, it should make everybody think. Anyway, the future of Russia. I don't know what to say. I wrote a few bullet points there today. Mega crisis. What's the narrative? I mean, how does Putin sell the future of Russia to anyone? If you're a 20-year-old in Russia, what do you want to do? What's your future? You don't have one. Anyway, let's not go into that one, but let's just put it this way, that technology is also incredibly important, because when you shut off technology from a country, they're never going to survive. That's exactly what we are doing. And the level of corruption again in Russia is at the magnitude that we just can't understand. Anyway, talking about geopolitics. We come into the situation where we have new players also entering the global decision-making in many different ways. We have this kind of state groups like the Quad or AUKUS. The Quad has been actually very active on the technological side, and that's not always good news for us, because they also realize themselves, for instance, that none of these countries have a telecom vendor supplier like Nokia or Ericsson by themselves. Big issues. Something I'm really following closely now are the BRICS. Normally it was just the 5 big countries. Now Argentina and Iran was just accepted as members. And in the next meeting there's going to be Turkey, Egypt and Saudi Arabia joining BRICS. A big counterweight to whatever we do in the Western world in many, many ways. Tech has not been on the agenda so much, but I bet you it's going to be heavy in there. Next week, this Thursday and Friday, there's the meeting on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is a sort of semi-Asian security organization that has also been a kind of nonsense. But with India, with Pakistan, with China, with Russia as members, this is more than half of the people in the world. There's big emphasis there on tech now. India has presidency next year, and that's really going to come in very heavily. There's also the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which is a treaty there in Asia between the stuns, as I call them, and Russia. Keep an eye on those. And keep an eye on this. These are the companies that are really everywhere. They have diplomats already. They have people. They have representations in the UN, in the EU, everywhere. They are just acting like countries. And like I said, they have more money than countries many times. So many, many things. Also cities, megacities, regions are entering the international fore. But also technology, it erodes all these traditional instruments in many ways. And I'm very skeptical about the WTO, for instance. When I entered the diplomatic service 25 years ago, there was something called the Doha Development Agenda. And it's still going on. DDA. So many people say that it meant don't do anything. And it doesn't work. And we are facing big problems there. Free trade agreements, in a sense, this is an interesting one in a sense, because this was originally, so this is all the ASEAN countries, Australia, New Zealand, and China. TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, was all Asian nations, ASEAN nations, Australia, New Zealand, and the US. And the first day in office, Trump abandoned it, threw it away, and gave the whole of Asia on a golden plate to China. Here you are, take it. In the hindsight, I think this will be one of the biggest mistakes in foreign policy ever made. This also brings the question about what's the future of the Bretton Woods institution, the World Bank, IMF, WTO I already mentioned. This is the competition, the Belt and Road Initiative, and the banks created by China the organizations. And then the BRICS Bank, the New Development Bank. I many times say that if I would be a dictator in Uganda or wherever, I would talk to these guys. Not necessarily the IMF or the World Bank, because they send 56 consultants who start giving you demands, whilst these people start acting immediately. And what will the legitimacy of the United Nations be? It will be challenged for sure. They really need to look themselves in the mirror and wonder sort of, where are we heading? What can we do? Big questions, I know. But also new enemies. Cyber attacks are coming in many ways. And these attacks are not from countries necessarily. They can be from groups, they can be from whatnots. How do we respond? It's a big question. And when you look at this picture, in a sense that the traditional army is not really the answer anymore. It's really the other side that is working. This could be seen in Ukraine, and I'm wondering sort of in a sense that we have conscription in Finland. When are we starting to educate people doing their army service with computers instead of with guns? Israel has done this for decades, and this is one of the big spawning grounds for startups in Israel, is actually the military service. And when you look at where is the war being held right now, of course, some is hardware. On the field, people are dying. But when you look at the battle for the hearts, the influence, it's the social media, it's the internet that is the key to everything. So technology affects really everything. It affects democracy. And when you look at sort of the thing is that why democracy is a key here, because many times when the technological advancement is so fast, it means that people feel that democracy doesn't protect them anymore. It doesn't protect their values. And it goes too fast. And this is the sort of breeding ground for all these populist movements. It's also a challenge to our sort of concept of human rights in many ways. But this picture is really interesting. It's from the election in 2020, and this guy barged into a live presentation in Las Vegas. And I think his T-shirts express the American situation very well, but also the Finnish. It basically says that I have the right to grill my meat in my backyard and drinking my beer, and nobody has anything to say about that. This guy doesn't care about climate change or vegan food or anything else. He cares about himself and his backyard and his sausage. And this is the situation we see all over the world. Climate change, we all know the importance on that one. I'm not digging that deep into it. Just saying that the sort of environmental, social, and governance, the ESG things are coming on the agenda for every single company everywhere. We talk about ethics, how do they go forward? And I'll bring one additional piece here in a sense that ESG has to be on all company strategies. I'm adding privacy. Privacy meaning how does the companies deal with their data? So maybe you hear it the first time, ESG is going to be ESGP in the near future. My prediction, this is going to be big. Also talking about resilient technologies in a sense, what do I mean by that? I mean that companies have to be cyber secure, they have to be sustainable, they have to have an organization that supports this, the supply chains and the whole infrastructure has to follow these values. So resilient technologies is also something that is going to be really big. A few last slides here on issues that are going to be important on the sort of geopolitical scene. One is mass movement. I'm thinking about a situation here, for instance, when say that you have famine in India. There's been small ones, but when we have a big one, it's not 1 million people moving. It's 100 million people moving. And when you have a situation like that, there's no army that stops it. And this is the situation what we are going to have in plenty of places. Africa can be the same place. But the kind of paradox here is that the importance of immigration is really big for all these companies in many, many ways. And if you look at the big tech companies in the world, they are totally dependent on immigration workforce. And same in Finland and all over the world. So I'm talking about something what I call digital colonialism. I think it was one question to the minister here before that a little bit addressed the value in this as well. We are taking away the best people from these places and we don't give them any tools so that they can prosper themselves. Something to think about as well. Energy, in today's world with the war, I don't need to say much about that, but the relationship between consumers and producers is changing rapidly in many ways, and this has enormous complications in everything. But we also have to be realists, not idealists. This graph just shows the sort of the growth of usage of energy in the world. In today's world, when we invest as much as we do in renewables, the sad situation, the fact is that only half of the growth is being covered by renewables. So it's going to be a long time before we can get this one in any other way. Journalism affected. This is just a graph about conspiracy theorists. Didn't exist before. Media is biased. We all know that, of course, in many ways. We all know Fox News, but many people don't actually realize that there's exactly the same thing on the leftist side. So it's there. The bottom line is, of course, that everything that was physical and local is now global and invisible. And this gives power to people that basically should not have power and should be regulated then by the platforms. I hope all of you have read George Orwell's 1984. This is a direct citation from the book, and I'll give you one interesting fact here when you read the quote, is that the Chinese Communist Party had last year in its Politburo meeting, they established a committee publicly, not even secretly. The name of the committee is the Committee for Rewriting the History. And that's quite kind of scary in many ways. We see the same things though many places, even in Finland. There are people who want to ban books and things like this. In the US, this movement is very, very strong. AI, we mentioned many times, the 3 different layers of AI. What is it really? Machine learning, deep learning, look into it. But this is an interesting part. When I was in the US in June, I went to the RSA, which is the biggest sort of cyber security event in the world. And there was a professor telling a story about what happens when the AI starts hacking. And they have seen it. And yesterday, I read a newspaper article about what happens when AI starts creating its own AI. And this is also going on. So it's kind of scary. We have to keep our eyes controlled on the algorithms, what really goes on. Privacy, we talked about. Who owns the data? I mentioned that in a sense. What consent have you been giving to them that the data is being used? How do you protect it? More important than ever. And is data the new currency? Your data. Maybe you can sell it in the future. Segue to digital currencies. What happens with Bitcoin and all this crypto stuff and so forth? I have my own very strong opinion, which is not necessarily a positive one, but let's leave it at that. But what happens when the governments and companies start issuing their own digital currencies? What will the impact be in many ways? And what will it mean for the traditional banking? I mean, when you look at this graph, these are companies that have never had any kind of a sort of a brick and mortar office. They're all acting on the internet. And when you think about the global south, the developing countries, there has never been a bank. This is the only bank they know. So they take a sort of gigantic leap into this one. Very, very interesting things in a sense. And what happens when the digital yuan comes into force? When China tells all the people they trade with that from now on, all the commodities that you buy from us is going to be priced in yuan. Very interesting thing. And what's happening to the dollar's hegemony in this? Companies are now putting up their own currencies. Libra was a Facebook attempt. The Fed shut it down in seconds. Now Amazon has announced that they are going to create their own currency, a digital currency. 5G I mentioned already before. What's the importance of 5G? 1, 2, 3, 4G was actually B2C. Now we talk about 5G, 6G. It's basically just an industrial application, nothing else. There's no need to talk faster. So to sum it up in a sense that the internet is today everything really. I mean, it's the data, it's the services, it's cloud, it's sensors, IoT and so forth. 3D is also something that is there. In the US, I visited the factory of SpaceX, and they 3D print most of the things in the rocket engines. They are not depending on any casting or anything else. The screws, you know, everything is 3D printed. Amazing development in value chains. The law, always reactive in many ways. Health, we haven't even touched on that one. Amazing potential. And then comes, of course, the last one, quantum computing. I don't know if you have been to VTT and have a look at the computer there. We have I think it's 12 qubits or something like that right now. But when we solve this one, we can use computational power that is 100 million times faster than the present computers. But to sum it up, is it the end of the nation state? In many ways, in the digital world, I think, I mean, it's not really anymore the nations that are the sole interlocutors in these issues. Technology is the main driver of everything really in the society. When you look at its democracy, its human rights, its foreign policy, security policy, energy policy, environmental policy, technology is the main driver of everything. It's changing everything also, how business is being done. And then what about Finland? I put in here a slide in a sense that change is calling. That's the logo of the Foreign Service. And see whether you press to the left or to the right. But we have to recognize this is the most important issue. There has to be resources. This is a new way of influencing. This is a new way of thinking. And we have to be proactive. We cannot be reactive. I mean, they say that the second mouse always gets the cheese right. But in this situation, I don't really think so. Or then we are irrelevant. Always end on a high note. So let's do that. I bet now that you are going to ask me, what should I do to be ahead of the curve, to learn, to see what's happening in the future? And I have the answers to you. Read the Jetsons. This is published in 1962. They had telehealth, they had video conferences, they had smartwatches. And if you look at the one on telehealth down there, they actually had curved screens at that time already in the vision of the artist. So that in short, what I had in mind on tech and geopolitics and the sort of interactions in between them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan. I have to say that there were pretty many topics in your presentation and big questions, but that's what life is about and the future. And I really like that even if you brought on the table the hard facts, you had this like a positive atmosphere and smile on your face all the time. And I think that's good also to see the possibilities what we have with technology. So actually my question to you is that, are we too pessimistic about this future? Is the technology actually the thing that we can solve these big challenges in the future?
I don't know if you're pessimistic, but I would say that we are afraid. And particularly the elderly generation, they are afraid that they don't understand, that they would misuse it, that people might laugh at them and things like this. And when they are afraid, they don't want to take these things into action. It's easy to try to do that. Many times I say that I have 3 guinea pigs in my life. I have my 2 sons that are 13 and 16. I have my father who is 83. And to see how my kids are using technology is fascinating. At the same time, it's also fascinating to listen to my father and how he sees it. He doesn't need these things, or he doesn't do this and that. And I think it's more being afraid of but I'm always the eternal optimist. We have to take these things into account. We have to break down the silos in the society, because now people are just trying to protect their little niche that they have. This is my thing, don't come and touch it. And like I said, I have realized very quickly that if you're just protecting your own, it's going to be disrupted from the outside. Somebody is bringing up something that is better, easier, and then it's going to be replaced. So adapt. I think adaptability is really the big key.
And read Jetsons. So data is big business. Some collected it. Data might impact the environment in which diplomats operate. Also, the flow of data might shape the flow of money. How does data impact the diplomacy? What would you say?
Well, in many ways, I mean, just the fact that I'm standing here as the Finnish first ambassador of technology shows that the impact is there. And because data, like I said, it impacts foreign policy, I mean, that's really the talk what I gave, the geopolitics of everything. And data is the basis for everything in that. So yes, I'm the first one in Finland, but I bet that give 5 or 7 years, there will be 15 people in a department that only deals with these issues, because the impact is so vast and it impacts so many things everywhere. So absolutely in that sense.
So do you have, for example, Stefan, in European Union countries, do you have colleagues? Are there other ambassadors in this field in some other countries?
Denmark is far ahead. They started already 7 years ago. But in most countries now, we have ambassadors of cyber issues. And it's a little bit the same, but still a little bit different, because they only look at this kind of cyber thing. In Finland, we also have a hybrid ambassador that works on hybrid threats. And many countries have that as well, in a sense. But the technological part, as a sort of comprehensive picture, is coming more and more. So the interesting fact is that I was in Ireland in May, and speaking at actually a Google conference. And so I sent a message to my colleague, the ambassador in Ireland, saying that if there's any use of me, I'm there for the weekend, so please ask. And I was actually called up by the Irish Secretary of State, who wanted to know, what do you do? Because they say that they are looking at these issues and they want to learn. I mean, it's really the thing, how do you see these things? What should we do? What should we get into? But many countries are organized in a different way, so they have a different trade ministry, foreign ministry, and it's a mix of everything. I know in Sweden it's a big fight between the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, whose responsibility is what. And if you look at an issue like 5G, I mean, it's trade policy, it's very much security policy today, and it's development policy. So whose responsibility is it? Very, very difficult to tackle many times.
Other question online. Some companies collect your personal data and interests. Then they show you some commercials according to that. They show also different commercials depending on the culture of the country. What do you think about this, Stefan?
It's a fact of life. This is how an algorithm works. I bet that most of you have encountered this, that you have spoken about something, say that I want to buy a new bicycle, and you just speak with your friends, and then 20 minutes later you have an ad on a bicycle in your Facebook feed or Insta feed or God knows what. This is just how the algorithms work. It's a very easy answer in that sense, because it's how it goes, but it's also what Minister Harakka said before. Many times the companies, they don't know themselves what the algorithms have actually brought into the feed. I have 2 practical examples. Many of you maybe know Alex Jones, the big conspiracy theorist, and he was a total unknown until YouTube started promoting his content. And if you listen to, say that you listen to AC/DC on YouTube, so the first 4 topics on the right, the recommendations, it's normally AC/DC, other songs from them. The next 4 is music, similar kind of that. The bottom is always something that they promote that is totally out of the picture. But there's only one meaning with that: drive traffic. And when they realized that Alex Jones' Infowars drives traffic, they recommended it. I think it was 20 billion times before they even realized that they had recommended it. And same thing with the anti-vax movement. It started with Facebook groups. That's how it got into picture. So yes, they are listening to everything, and only for pure commercial reasons the algorithms are written in a sense that they promote things that drive traffic, because traffic means money. So that's what it's all about to Gorkam.
Any questions, comments? Please.
You mentioned about it becoming a tripolar world with EU with its own agenda, US and China, right? If we study a little bit about Cold War, it was all about militarization of the West and the Eastern Bloc. But right now, there's this data is the new oil, and you mentioned data is the new plutonium, right? So data and energy are becoming these two factors which are going to establish the next huge global players. But we do not see the same level of activism as in, like, if you read about nuclear proliferation treaty or nuclear watch bodies across the globe. But if data is the new plutonium, where is that global drive? Because the dot-com bubble, it happened in the early 2000s. We were with Web 1.0. Now it's Web 2.0. And like you mentioned, we are currently in the stage of Web 4.0 and 5.0. So where do you think we are in those terms that currently a Cold War is going on for this data monopoly? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I'm doubtful that we will ever get into kind of a full consensus in the world how to regulate algorithms, how to regulate the data usage. It's going to be individual initiatives then, like the EU one, that is going to be followed by at least the Western Hemisphere. And interestingly enough, I learned today that GDPR has actually been implemented in Russia before the war. So many Russian companies were following GDPR issues there. So it's everything is up in the air right now. And we don't know where it's coming down and how it is. These are the first initiatives in a way. And we are still on a learning curve. The companies are on a learning curve. I don't blame them that much in a sense, because like I said, they don't even know everything in this. And it also shows the fact that when I moved to the US in 2016, Facebook had in their sort of global governmental relations office 3 people in the whole Facebook. Now they are 300 just in the US, maybe 300 more in Europe. So all these issues are exploding like this right now. And there is no government sort of regulatory body that actually could have a global jurisdiction on any of these issues. The UN just appointed a couple of months ago its first tech envoy. The UN is not the right thing there. It will come from the mobile networks. I don't know. But you're really on the sort of key topic there, is that how do we get to universal regulation on these issues? But then comes another question. What tells you that your opinion is right, that you are the one who have the right to post something that you think is right? And is that the truth, or is it my truth? Or is it your truth? So who is the one who is going to determine what is actually right to post? I'm just placing the question, because this is the big issue in a sense, that a fact is a fact, but the truth is a truth, and then you have people who talk about alternative truths. So very big, very complicated question, to which I cannot give you a direct answer, but I think the EU way is the right way forward right now.
Thank you very much, Stefan Lindström, our ambassador in digitalization and new technologies, the first one and the best one. Thank you very much for giving this lecture in Aalto University, and thank you all for participating this evening here in the lecture hall as well as online. And we will continue after 1 week, same place, same time, and we will have 2 next lectures. First will be given very well-known cyber expert Kenneth Gears, and he will be talking about actually more or less the little bit same presentation than he just gave recently in the DEF CON, in the big cyber conference in Las Vegas, and he will be talking about Russian hacks in war of Ukraine. And then the other lecture next week will be Nora Hammar. She is the president and founder of the Women for Cyber, and he will be talking about this human aspect of technology. So thank you very much for this evening, and thank you once more, Stefan. All the best in your job, and we will see after 1 week. Thank you.
Thank you.